Hello and welcome to another episode of With Enough Prep Time. I'm your host, the Nerd Man, and today we're going to be reviewing something a little bit different. It's something that I've been planning to do on my channel for a long time, which is follow some of the cases, or the most kind of well-documented and, infamous cases of cancel culture in modern times. And one thing I wanted to do is a review of the new documentary by, the new documentary, which is Allen v. Farrow, which covers the acrimonious split between Allen and Farrow, which led to charges against director Woody Allen for child abuse or sexual assault on a minor. Now, I wanted to give just a little, caveat, like, first of all, just to say that this one is a particularly close case to me. Woody Allen, for a long time, and even up until now, is one of my favorite directors. I've seen many of his films. I haven't seen them all, actually, but I've seen many of them, and they're among, easily maybe 3 or 4 of them would be in my top 10 movies of all time. And I'm also a really huge fan of Mia Farrow, so both as an actress and as a humanitarian kind of figure. I think of her as somewhat of a kind of class act, in how she's used her wealth and power to help those in need, essentially, adopting children and all of this kind of thing. So it was very, when I first started watching Woody Allen films, and, he was an unblemished character to me. I was studying at the time, studying literature and really heavy into kind of philosophy. So his films really appealed to me because they had so much discussion of this kind of existential and philosophical conundrums that human beings tend to have regarding the meaning of life and what their place is in the world and what they ought to do, how they ought to act. He really was the kind of custodian of a form of artistic expression that goes back to Shakespeare and Dostoevsky, in which difficult questions about the nature of existence and our finitude were explored, but always within the bounds of incredibly entertaining narratives. So to me, he was just a master of film and and a master of writing, really. And as somebody who wrote myself, it was again something that was really just fascinating to me, his work. So that's kind of my intro into how I first felt about his films. But actually, this scandal of Woody Allen's had happened way before I even started watching his films, which is kind of funny. I think they may have even happened prior to my birth. So it was very soon into it that I started reading, his biographies and stuff like that, in which I became familiar with the scandal that happened at the center of his, at the center of his life, right? Like this is now, along with his great works in film, kind of his legacy now. And I remember being at first incredibly defensive over Woody Allen, and this is just, straight kind of, I'm being kind of really, really honest about uh, what my position was at first. I was very, very defensive over Woody Allen, and I against the charges specifically by Dylan Farrow over him. So if anyone doesn't know about the charges, I hesitate to say spoiler alert because it seems inappropriate. But I will be telling you what happens in, what happened in his life, and therefore telling you the nature of this documentary. So Woody Allen in this is basically when his relationship with Mia Farrow actually came to an end, because he had an affair with one of her daughters, who was, according to him, was over the age of, I think, either 18 or 21. I'm not sure at the time. It's kind of relevant, and it will be relevant in future as we discuss this. But his relationship to her had started, and therefore the relationship with Mia had begun to collapse. And what happened from there is that Woody Allen actually found that he was having to do visits to the rest of the family. So Mia had a big family of adopted and biological children. One of the biological children was Dylan Farrow, who was the youngest, and she was the one that Woody Allen was actually, father to. And so I'll go into the nature of their relationship a bit later, but this relationship that so he went to the family house to one day while he was being, watched. Basically, I think even social workers were there because he wasn't allowed with the children alone. And it was at this point that Dylan Farrow claims that he took her to an attic when she was about 4 years old and inappropriately touched her, right? So he'd had this terrible affair before, and then he, did this. And my response to it was a very kind of, I think, misogynistic and masculine response at first, which was, how preposterous. I mean, that on this particular day, that Woody Allen would choose at this, particular moment to do this to a little girl when he's being watched, observed, everybody hates him in the house. For him to do this. And my other defense was, well, with the daughter Sun Yi, who is now his wife of many, many years now, with her, that if he truly with her, that he wasn't her real father, basically. So apparently they didn't spend a lot of time together. She wasn't really interested in him, and she wasn't the type of person in the whole household that generally was bonded with the family. She was one of the adopted children. I think she came from Korea, that really just didn't, she didn't find herself warming to her adopted family in the same way as some of the other children did. So him having an affair with her, while bad, according to me when I was younger, was still, this whole narrative that he had married his stepdaughter was absolute nonsense. That's how I felt about it at the time. Looking back at it, I feel like I should have had a little bit more empathy to, in fact, a lot more empathy towards the situation of Mia Farrow. Because on one hand, we have this documentary now, and on the other hand, we have the demonizing of Mia Farrow by Woody Allen fans who try and make it out like she is this horrible, terrible person for believing her daughter in this story that has been spun about this assault that happened to her, or at least the story, not a story that's been spun, but what she claims to have happened to her. So a lot of Woody Allen fans really attack Mia Farrow so it's a really complicated situation, actually. So a lot of Woody Allen fans attack Mia Farrow, and we're going to go into that a bit later. But that's the kind of setup of everything, and what this documentary is going into. So where I want to start is because I think the thing that is most interesting about this documentary to me, it is a technical tour de force in terms of documentary making. These documentary makers are extremely talented, and they, you know, have a way of telling a story that is incredibly compelling. And I've seen these documentary makers before. Now, they have done a couple of documentaries, both of them, and they've done a couple of names, and now for some reason I don't have their names, and it's very, very annoying. But they've done a couple of documentaries, one of which I'd seen specifically called The Hunting Ground, which follows, which basically is a documentary that covers sexual assaults on university campuses. I'm trying to get their names very, very quickly, so I'm really sorry. I'm just going to have to do this, and it's very, very annoying to me. So yeah, the documentary makers, the directors Kirby Dick and Amy Zering, and then there's another executive producer named Amy Hurdy. Now these guys are really like big parts of the Me Too movement. They've been very, very vocal in the Me Too movement, and they've come up with really, really groundbreaking and really, really well done documentaries. I mean, these are talented filmmakers, and they've covered various kind of topics on surrounding sexual assault, including sexual assault on university campuses, within the armed forces as well. And what they tend to do in these documentaries, and this will bring me back to Woody Allen, and it's actually why I'm making this video and why I think this is so important. What they do in these films is, because of their extraordinary talent as filmmakers, they are able to make these really, really compelling narratives and stories and put it all together in a way that is truly convincing. But they do it from the perspective of a particular person, namely the alleged victim of these of the supposed crimes. Now, in The Hunting Ground, that was the first documentary I ever watched of theirs, and I remembered um, enjoying it, not enjoying it in the sense of enjoying the subject matter, which was, sexual assault on college campuses, but I did remember really enjoying it in terms of the way it was produced and the compelling argument it was giving to how women were really being, you know, that their claims of sexual assault were really being undermined by universities and investigated in ways that really didn't favor the women and really favored the potential or alleged perpetrators of these crimes. So I thought it was really, really interesting. But I started to get this queasy feeling halfway through the documentary. And this queasy feeling came about when they started focusing less on the so they were looking at fraternities on college campuses, where there was supposedly a kind of culture of rape, and women were talking about the cases where they had been assaulted in these fraternities, but they weren't showing any of the actual victims, any of the actual perpetrators of of these cases, because they were alleged, to have committed these crimes, but none of these guys were convicted. So, I was like, okay, great, we get to hear the story of these girls, but they're not going to show people who haven't actually been convicted of crime. It's good, let's hear them out, we should believe them, they should have a voice, et cetera, et cetera. And hopefully this documentary will help, change university policies so that these women are more easily heard while still respecting due process. But as I said, around the halfway mark, I started getting this queasy feeling, because when they were showing pictures of the fraternities and where the houses where these fraternities stayed, they would tend to obscure the men and highlight how many vulnerable women were coming to these parties and shindigs and whatever at these fraternity houses. So you really didn't see, the men so much. It didn't really identify what kind of men were going to these parties, what they looked like, what was their social status, their wealth, their, et cetera, et cetera. But then it started going on to football, the culture of rape, of sexual assault around, around the kind of athletes within universities. So a lot of athletes obviously get scholarships to these universities, and they started focusing really on that. And now you were starting to get very, very clear pictures of these athletes. They weren't obscuring it like the fraternities. You started to know exactly who they were talking about. And the people that these documentary makers were focusing on, which I was getting this queasy feeling of, was young black men who got scholarship to athletics. It was exactly crowds of black footballers, mainly, or American footballers, who were being focused on. Now, the film itself had various different stories, each of which didn't show who the perpetrator was. It just told the girl's story, just told what she thought had happened, or what she, what had happened to her from her point of view. But it didn't, tell the guy's story. But that was fine, because they didn't show the guy. However, the documentary then, after sometimes spending a lot of time putting black males in full focus, right? So now they were the focus of this documentary. It was black males being the focus, right? Then this documentary takes a real leap from queasy feeling to straight up disturbing, because it goes on to tell the case of a young man named Jameis Winston, who won the Heisman Trophy, same trophy won by O.J. Simpson. The irony of that not like there's or an being made trophy from Gilman and female spouse. They start focusing on this. It is a woman who uses of assaulting her, and even when you're listening of this woman, you can hear. I'm not going to go into the full allegation and and talk about all of that, but I wanted to give context to these people's documentary and the kind of documentary makers that they are. They showed Jay Winston. They only told the story, this young black. They only told the story from this woman's point of view. And then I went to, and when I was listening to the story from this woman, it didn't exactly hang together, even from her own account. But then when I went to go and look up the facts of this case had been investigated by the university. It had been, taken to trial. The man had been since, is acquitted for all of the crimes, and yet these people were talking about this case as if he was guilty. They had decided his guilt. They had used a documentary to decide the guilt, to retry this man only from one perspective, that is the perspective of the accuser, and retry this man in the media and through a documentary. This was their style of documentary making. They used all this slick kind of, subtle, documentary making to make themselves look as if they were holier than thou, and wouldn't, in any way stoop to, manipulating facts or using, doing things that were, highly unethical. And then they finish off painting black people as basically the poster boys of sexual assault on university campuses. And we all know the narrative of black males in America, and what's gone on in terms of being falsely accused of sexually assaulting white women. And this was a blonde white woman, so it's the perfect kind of victim, to parade for everyone, so that they could make this black guy look guilty. Now, I am not saying, I do not know. I've read into the case. I've looked into it. I think, as far as the evidence goes, it supports a non-conviction. There wasn't enough evidence to support any, kind of, sexual assault. However, that being said, I'm not saying that this didn't happen to this girl. It may well have happened to her. But what is unethical is to follow all these cases, and many of them which were assaults carried out by white men, and then finish off the documentary with a sexual assault, and finish it off with a sexual assault by a black male. I think that's highly problematic, and I think that's disturbing documentary making, especially when their claim their claim is that they're trying to take on the privileged. I maybe if I can find it here, but they say they're trying to take on what they see as a privileged class of males who go to university, who can hide behind their privilege in order to create this culture of sexual assault. One that stood out for me is the girl that actually accused this young man, Jameis Winston, of sexual assault, ended up being somebody, the young woman who ended up accusing of sexual assault was quoted by her own auntie, who ended up being one of the lawyers on the case, as saying, "Of course I didn't sleep with him. I would never sleep with a black man." This was her auntie, her own auntie, who said this. So we can imagine the kind of background that she may have come from, when her own auntie would openly say that she said, "Of course I didn't consent to sex with this black man, because I would never stoop so low as to sleep with a black man." So the fact that these documentary makers of The Hunting Ground, of Mia versus Farrow, were willing to use this case that had so much, and I can, one day I might even do a video on it, that had so much about it that had, a tinge of suspicion as to, yes, he may have done it, but also he may be very, very innocent. And we might be dealing with a girl who regretted the sexual experience that she had and came out against a black male because he's an easy target. So that is the background of these documentary makers and the kind of ethics that they pursue in terms of using documentaries to retry cases that they don't believe came down in the favor of who they think were right. So now we can go back to Mia Farrow and Woody Allen, using this as a context for discussing this case. Now, in terms of the case with Mia Farrow and Woody Allen, we now know that this case was exhaustively investigated, that Woody Allen was, in fact, he was essentially, they couldn't even bring it to trial. They didn't have enough evidence to bring it even to trial for the sexual assault of this young girl. Now, do I blame Mia Farrow for believing her daughter? No, Dylan Farrow. I don't blame her. Her brother, Ronan Farrow, has gone around as one of the big campaigners of the Me Too movement, and he's been somebody who actually really has had a great deal of impact and done some really good things in terms of exposing powerful men with a long history of sexual abuse that can be corroborated by multiple sources. So great on him. But in this case, we're talking about somebody, an individual that is in Woody Allen, who's only been accused once of, at least in the age bracket that Dylan is claiming this assault happened. He has no history before or since of doing that. They paint this really weird picture of him as of doing these incredibly inappropriate things with Dylan prior to the day in question. And so apparently Woody Allen was supposedly very close to her. He always, wanted her, Dylan around him. He basically you know, spoilt her and coddled her in a way that he didn't with, you know, have the same relationship with the rest of the children. And so Woody Allen supposedly showed her a lot of affection that Mia and a psychiatrist apparently claimed there was something wrong happening there. There was something weird about it. But the problem is with all of that case that they bring up is he didn't sexually assault her during that. Whether he was being really, really affectionate to her in an inappropriate way or not, he never actually sexually assaulted her during all of that period of time that they're talking about. He just was affectionate in a way that made people uncomfortable, apparently. So there's that. And then there's this one assault that happens under very, very strange circumstances in a household that is incredibly, you know, upset with him and hostile towards Woody Allen because of this affair that he's had with the daughter. And it's at this time he chooses to, you know, sexually molest Dylan Farrow. And I've seen the videos of Dylan Farrow discussing her sexual assault by Woody Allen, and they strike me as rather performative. That this is something that she's convinced herself of. And I'm not saying that look, when I say convinced herself of, I mean that the way she discusses it, not that it's untrue, but the way she discusses it does not strike me as the kind of admission of somebody who, you know, a child, especially as a child, you'd be very, very reluctant. It would take you, you know, most children who've been assaulted by a father figure like that, that they love, that they care for, it will take them time. It will take them a month, 2 months, 3, 4, 5, you know, maybe even a year before they actually process what actually happened to them and understand it. I actually honestly don't think Mia coached Dylan to say this. There's a lot of theories that by the anti-Mia kind of pro-Woody crowd, but believe that Mia actually coached Dylan to say this. What I believe is Dylan was a very precocious child who probably was exposed to a lot of adult things even as a young child, because, you know, she was the child of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow, and these were kind of very artistic people. We probably took her to see, you know, a lot of adult themed things even for a child, like great artists and paintings, and showing her films and, you know, talking to her probably quite candidly about certain things that you know, most 4-year-olds wouldn't be talked to about. And I believe she was probably a quite precocious child who could have known that kind of accusation would get her father in trouble. And that Mia, hearing it, because obviously Woody's now a monster to her because of his affair with Sun-Yi, just believes her daughter. And Ronan Farrow believes his sister. I believe that's perfectly possible, and I believe that's probably the best way to explain this happening. Now, what I would say is to people who are pro-Woody Allen and are fiercely against Mia Farrow, is that one has to understand from her point of view, this man actually, you know, he didn't do anything illegal, but he did something so monstrous, so absolutely abhorrent, to actually sleep with a young daughter of the person that you're going out with. Whether you had a relationship with the daughter or not, it doesn't matter. To actually do that, you know, and to show so little remorse or understanding why Mia would be angry at you for doing that, is beyond comprehension to me. And to me, as much as a fan of Woody Allen as I am, I can completely understand why Mia is all the way, you know, daggers and knives towards him, and would contribute to a documentary like this, and would try and ruin Woody Allen's career. He did something just unspeakably abhorrent to Mia Farrow. I'm not saying he deserves to be labeled a child molester because of it, but nonetheless, you know, when you play with fire, you get burnt. And that's how I feel about Woody Allen and this whole case. I don't think there's any heroes in this case whatsoever. But I do know one villain, and that is these documentary makers. These documentary makers have gone into the lives of, you know, an incredibly dysfunctional family, and, you know, their story raised to heights of drama because of their wealth and power and influence. And they've concocted a completely false narrative in order to ruin a man who ultimately was not even acquitted because they couldn't even bring a case against him. The evidence was so lacking in this case against him, and the accusation was so preposterous and absurd as to what they claimed he was supposed to have done. The family said, most of the people said they were watching him all the time. They were instructed to watch Woody Allen all the time during his visit to Mia's house to visit his children, Dylan, and I believe Ronan. So where do I go from this? The reason I'm bringing this up is because I'm seeing a disturbing trend in documentary makers being able to do this, being able to retry cases that have already, where people have already been acquitted. This young black man, who I'm much more concerned with than I am Woody Allen, who was actually acquitted of all charges against this young woman. And this documentary makers decided to take it upon themselves, because they didn't believe that the right verdict had been rendered, to retry this in the public imagination and potentially ruin this man's life, so that everywhere that he goes he is followed with the accusation rapist. And if they can do this, you know, if they perfect this formula, they did this in Saving or Leaving Neverland as well, the documentary makers who did this with Michael Jackson in Leaving Neverland. If they can do this, the concerning trend for me is that you just, in virtue of a documentary, and to be fair, they did it to O.J. Simpson as well, because he was not convicted. Whatever you want to say about the case, he wasn't convicted. You can say the jury was whatever. He wasn't convicted. To be able to retry these cases, as you know, to do a trial by media, and to leave it up to the court of public opinion, and to shape the facts to fit only the narrative of the supposed victim, I think is highly, highly unethical. And in this case, there are actually accusations also against Mia Farrow to having abused certain children that she adopted from different parts of the world. So all of her white children, as I understand, are doing quite well, whereas her black and Asian children aren't doing as well, and claim to have been abused, and claim to have been treated like servants around the house for the white children. Now, I don't know if that's the case. And I will give Mia Farrow the benefit of the doubt that this is a hurt and dysfunctional family, and that many things are being said on both sides where they're exaggerating the crimes of either parent. But nonetheless, one victim is being believed, which is the white, virtuous Dylan Farrow. But the Asian, victim, who is Moses Farrow, he's not being believed. His story that Mia Farrow abused him is not being addressed. Why is that? Coming from the documentary makers who did a film where they were discussing, the culture of sexual assault on university campuses, and decided to focus only on one black male, it doesn't strike me as very strange that they would believe this white woman, Dylan Farrow, over an Asian man, Moses Farrow. And that's me and my discussion of the first two parts of this documentary. I will cover the rest of the documentary and say my thoughts on it. But, in terms of what's happening with the case of Mia Farrow and Woody Allen and how it's being played out, I think it's incredibly disturbing, because now what we're seeing is Woody Allen being cancelled and people turning against him. Big directors turning against him, saying, I don't know why I worked with him, putting him in the same place as someone like Roman Polanski, who was actually convicted and tried and admitted sleeping with a 13-year-old girl. This is a completely different scenario. Woody Allen wasn't convicted of anything, and yet people are turning against him. And I think it's a deep shame. I think it shows a lot of callousness within the Hollywood community. They used him and then went, to get their Oscars. And then when, he wasn't useful to them, they dropped him like a bad habit. Anyway, thanks so much. Please like and subscribe for more content. I do discuss cancel culture a lot and these sexual assault cases a lot. Please like, subscribe, and see you on the flip side. Love you 3000.